A very good evening. Welcome to Swarajya Conversations. My name is Sharad Pawar and I'm your host. A long pending conversation here was that we did not discuss the Maharashtra outcome, especially after the MVA government collapsed in Maharashtra. And now Eknath Shinde has been sworn in as the chief minister. But to put the whole thing into perspective as to what led this rebellion and why did Shinde become the chief minister, I'm joined by Suraj Balakrishnan from Mumbai. Suraj, thank you so much and a very good evening to you. It's a pleasure to have you on Swarajya.
Good evening, Sharon. Good to have you. Good to have. Glad to be on this.
See that's what happens when you are yeah, when the guest also happens to be a anchor and a host on different platforms. So the roles will be reversed sometimes. But Suraj, you have been tracking the events in Maharashtra very closely, and we've been planning this for some time now. First of all, in your perspective, why do you think the entire collapse happened? Because for almost 2.5 years, the government was quite stable under Uddhav Thackeray, and all of a sudden there was a rebellion. So let me ask you this: Who actually held the mandate in the first place?
Yeah, that's the fulcrum, and that's what the rebel or so-called rebel Sena MLAs and the BJP leaders constantly talk about, isn't it? The fact that in 2019, Devendra Fadnavis, incidentally, was the first real chief minister to complete those 5 years in Maharashtra at a stretch, 5 years continuously, and a very young chief minister at that. And in 2019, when the BJP Sena, as a part of the NDA, along with smaller parties like Ramdas Athawale's RPI and a couple of others, when they went to polls, the face of that campaign in the state was Devendra Fadnavis, and of course, in the center was Narendra Modi, Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So the two parties, the BJP and the Shiv Sena, under Uddhav Thackeray at the time, went to polls to get a mandate once again on the basis of the work that was done by Devendra Fadnavis as chief minister in those 5 years, from 2014 to 2019. So there was a clear, mandate which was sought by not just the BJP but also the Shiv Sena under the face of Devendra Fadnavis as the chief minister, and of course Prime Minister Narendra Modi for that campaign. And as a result of that, BJP got around 105 seats, and of course Shiv Sena got 56. When you add up, the both, it was clearly well past majority. They got around, I believe, 165 odd seats. The magic figure, the halfway mark, was 144. So they were well past majority, and it was a clear mandate, a clear reinforcement by the people of Maharashtra and of course Mumbai as well for another BJP Sena government. Now, after the results came out on the since actually the evening of the results coming out, we had some very interesting statements, very weird statements, because at that time it was pretty clear throughout the campaign that Sena was also campaigning for Fadnavis as chief minister. But then your likes of Sanjay Raut kept saying that अगला मुख्यमंत्री सिर्फ शिवसेना का ही होगा. And he kept saying this day after day after day. And initially, a lot of people thought, okay, this guy's just a motor mouth. He's just wanting to get some airtime and have some fun on live television. He's not serious. And even to be fair, even Fadnavis and some of the BJP leaders just said that just ignore a few comments. These things happen every now and then in part of as part of coalition dharma, and as part of two allies which have been together incidentally for a long time, since 1989. So it was a really long period. So
Right.
this is part of the whole thing. But then eventually, as the days progressed, it was clear that Shiv Sena were very clear that they wanted an arrangement where BJP would have their chief minister for 2.5 years, and Shiv Sena would have their chief minister for 2.5 years. And then you had a few trending hashtags every now and then that they wanted Aditya Thackeray to be the next leader or the next chief minister of Maharashtra. So it was very clear that Uddhav Thackeray wanted to kind of prop up his son for one, and of course he wanted to get a bigger share of the pie as opposed to Sena. Now the difference, as many viewers would ask, what is the why should BJP allow Nitish Kumar to be CM of Bihar? Whereas be very very adamant that there cannot be a two and a half year agreement. The difference here is that, as we know, Nitish Kumar has been the CM of Bihar for a long time, and whenever BJP, especially in the last 2 or 3 election cycles, have gone into that Bihar election, it was always with the face of Nitish Kumar and with a clear message that Nitish Kumar would be the NDA's face. Whereas in this case, there was absolutely nothing of that sort. In all the rallies, including that of Aditya Thackeray in Worli, his constituency, there was a massive virtual rally, and of course, fully fledged rallies as well, where clearly Fadnavis's pictures were there, Narendra Bhai Modi's pictures were there, and it was very evident that the Shiv Sena also agreed that their leader, their face of this campaign, of the NDA campaign, was Devendra Fadnavis. So it made no sense to give Sena 2.5 years when BJP had 105 seats and Sena had 56. There's just about less than half the amount of seats that BJP had. So how can a party which gets half the amount of seats that the BJP has had, stake claim for CM-ship and of course 2.5 year,
Right.
2.5 year formula? It doesn't make any sense.
Right, and traditionally Shiv Sena has never appointed a Thackeray as the chief minister directly, so there was no speculation at all in the beginning that Uddhav actually had such ambitions. You're right, and you did mention about Aditya Thackeray later getting the ministry, uh, but what I'm more curious is the sympathy that even the rebel MLAs have towards Aditya Thackeray, and maybe you can cover this later on. But first, let's address the crux of the issue. Why was there a rebellion? What do you think are the causes for the rebellion? Do you think it was very planned or was it very instinctive?
If we have to get into the details of it, I think this can be a great web series. The Maharashtra political crisis on Amazon Prime or Netflix, or one of those TV shows, because there's actually the drama and the amount of recce that was done, before this whole thing, amount of planning that was done, both from Maharashtra and I suppose from Delhi as well, and of course, within the Shiv Sena and within certain leaders of the BJP. That was unbelievable. It really tops any crime scene or any crime thriller or any big adventure thriller on any of your OTT platforms. So, as per an aide of Devendra Fadnavis, he had mentioned both to me and also to some reporters around the swearing in of Eknath Shinde, around the second day of the swearing in of Eknath Shinde, that this was planned 8 months before it actually happened. So this entire drama broke, or rather, came to the forefront around June 20th, and thereabouts after that. And by June 22nd, Sharan, it was quite clear that Eknath Shinde had the numbers. And despite whatever the Uddhav camp was putting out through Sanjay Raut, they didn't have the numbers. Eknath Shinde had the numbers, and it was only growing by the day. So initially, we had numbers that 12 MLAs went to Gujarat, Sena MLAs went to Gujarat, and then to Guwahati. Then it became 32. Then it became 34, and then it became around 40 thereabouts. So coming back, this rebellion was planned around 8 months before it, and it was planned because everyone knew that this arrangement was going to be unstable. Because on one hand, you have a Hindutwadi party, and of course a Maharashtra First Party, like in terms of the Shiv Sena. You have an NCP who, frankly, don't really have an ideology. I mean, they claim to be secular now, but they had offered unconditional support to the BJP in 2014. Before that, they always play both sides. NCP's thing, and I don't think I'll be too harsh on saying this. It's just only ideology is money and power, which fair enough. A lot of parties, political parties in India and the world do their politics based on power and based on getting as many resources for their candidates and for their leaders as possible. The other, of course, is the Congress, and the Congress and the Sena equation was the most, let's just say, the most weirdest, in the whole thing, because Congress is very clear, especially under Rahul Gandhi and even before during Indira Gandhi's time, that they want to be secular, they want to be left of center socially, they don't want to, be seen anywhere close to someone like a Bala Sahib Thackeray. And even when Bala Sahib Thackerays, memorial happened, when after he died, and there was a big public, outpouring of emotion, not just from Shiv Sainik, but across the length and breadth of Mumbai and Maharashtra. The Congress top leaders refused from, taking any public stand of sympathy or affection. And what was very important was right after the MVA started, they had said that we are forming this government on, based on inspiration of three leaders. One is, of course, Hindu Hriday Samrat Balasaheb Thackeray. The second was Sharad Pawar, and third was Sonia Gandhi. So the Shiv Sena MLAs publicly, took the oath on the name of these three leaders, including Sonia Gandhi, which Fadnavis immediately pointed out, in 2019 when this government was formed. And after that, you had a series of instances on social media and others where it was clear that Uddhav Thackeray was doing whatever he could to, to make the the first family of the Congress happy, to make Sharad Pawar Saab happy. He went on publicly posing in Rajiv Gandhi's birth anniversary about how much he respects the late Prime Minister, but that was never reciprocated, right? That was never reciprocated. In terms of Balasaheb Thakray's birth anniversary and death anniversary and
Right.
whatnot, some Maharashtra Congress leaders might talk about it, about the fact that he was such a great leader in the state. But
Yeah.
from the Congress High Command in Delhi, there was not a single display of affection for the great Balasaheb Thackeray. And
Yeah.
even when the memorial happened, they didn't really say much to kind of sympathize with the Thackeray family. So that was something which, again, Uddhav Thackeray and family might or might not have been happy with it, but the Sainiks on the ground clearly felt it. And otherwise, this refusal on those Facebook lives earlier to kind of have Shivaji Maharaj just statue there, or even on sometimes Balasaheb Thakray's picture there, which incidentally he did it after this rebellion took place, right? He had the picture on the background of both his father and, of course, of Shivaji Maharaj as well. So you saw the Uddhav Sena, so to speak, being from a very out and out, unabashed Hindutva first, Marathi first party to kind of being secular, and to allow the likes of Nawab Malik to make a lot of statements, to allow the likes of NCP leaders to make a lot of statements. But leaving aside all this, in terms of the entire uh, backroom chat and this entire perception really on social media and of course on the ground, the biggest thing was the MLAs factor. The Shiv Sena MLAs routinely felt that they were ignored by, of course, the party supremo Uddhav Thackeray, and of course they were also ignored by the finance minister Ajit Pawar, who incidentally gave more funds in some occasions to the BJP leaders more than the Shiv Sena leaders. So the Congress ministers were reasonably, happy or thereabouts. The NCP MLAs were very happy because their constituency got tons of funds, and they were very happy with the finance minister, the former finance minister Ajit Pawar. But the Sena MLAs, many of them, did not get the funds. And then, of course, Uddhav Thackeray
Right.
had some health issues, and he wasn't accessible to his party MLAs, party
Yeah.
corporators, party leaders. And that again, the Shinde faction of the Shiv Sena repeatedly said in those letters from Guwahati that, we've been waiting outside, we've been waiting for an appointment. We were told very curtly, very rudely to just,
Yeah.
get lost, to go back or come back again. Whereas the NCP MLAs, some of the NCP leaders actually got audience with the Thackeray. So that was another big, big flashpoint. The NCP leaders, some of them got an audience with Uddhav Thackeray, and of course with other Sena top leaders, but these Shiv Sena MLAs did not get it. The other point, Sharon, I know this, we are going quite into deep into it. Other point is that the coterie around Uddhav Thackeray, right? Earlier, you had some powerful MLAs, mass leaders who had public ground support, who had, who were part of his coterie. But now it was people like Anil Parab, who, by the way, was a transport minister, who was an MLC. MLC means he's not directly elected by the people. He's not an MLA. He's being
Right.
voted by the MLAs to become the member of Legislative Council. And of course, you
Mm.
had his son, and you had Milan Narvekar, who was his secretary, political secretary, his assistant, so to speak. And of course, you had Rashmi Thackeray, his wife, and his wife's family also playing a big role. Members of his wife's family, like Varun Sardesai, who was given an important role in the Yuva Sena, the youth wing of the Shiv Sena. So these sort of coterie around it, and played a big part. And the MLAs felt that if we go on like this, we are not going to get elected again. Why? Because the NCP, the NCP workers and the NCP leaders in their constituencies were getting bigger and bigger, or they were getting more influential. So they weren't sure that they'll get tickets again. And we, of course, they weren't feeling respected, and they felt that the NCP and the Congress, but especially the NCP, were having a huge influence, and huge amount of resources and money was going into them rather than the Sena. So that's the a gist of the background before this whole rebellion, which was supposedly planned 8 months before.
It's a fantastic summary, but I have to ask you, how much of this did have to do with the ideological commitment? Because that is one factor that many experts have not been able to analyze. Whether Shiv Sena's MLAs were actually feeling ideologically outcast in that sense by suddenly adopting this secular approach and being very appeasing to the Gandhis and the Pawars.
I mean, that definitely has a role to play in it. Ideologically, Balasaheb Thackeray was clear that he wanted Hindutva to remain on the forefront. That is why publicly he has repeatedly said that the reason why he allied with at that time, Pramod Mahajan of the BJP, and of course the late Gopinath Munde as well, is because he didn't want the Hindu votes to get divided. If you wanted to beat the Congress NCP or the Congress at the time, you had to unite the Hindu vote, and he didn't want the vote to get divided, or to kind of do that. So that's what he was very clear about. And the MLAs also, and to be fair, even Uddhav Thackeray earlier, he did talk about, Chalo Ayodhya, and let's go to Ayodhya and let's create a big, a big fanfare there before 2019. So that was very clear. But so ideologically, yes, it did happen. And if you look at, if you were in Mumbai, Sharan, you will notice that for in many pockets of the Sena areas, especially the ones where the top leaders of the party, Uddhav Thackeray, Aditya Thackeray, and of course Balasaheb Thackeray were put up in terms of posters. Suddenly, you found the saffron, the bhagwa going from bhagwa to green. In a few areas, because of course the Sena wanted to win the BMC, which is going to happen, I think, in September, October most likely. And the Sena knew that once the MVA government was formed, the BJP would definitely get a higher share of the Hindu vote, not just the North Indian or the South Indian or the non-Marathi Hindu vote, but even the Marathi Hindu vote. So as a result of that, they wanted to get the M plus M combination, that is Marathi, the Marathi Manus, so to speak, and of course the Muslims as well, the M plus M. That's what
Right.
the
Very
Thackeray's
interesting.
wanted to do it. So in
And
that sense,
yeah,
the M plus M combination, had to work, and you got a sense that ideologically, a lot of the more than the MLAs, I would say, Sharan, the ground workers were not happy at all, and they weren't comfortable sharing stage with a so-called secular NCP or a secular Congress.
right. And how did Eknath Shinde come into the scene all of a sudden? I mean, people have known that he was very close to Balasaheb Thackeray, but what enabled this action, especially because you mentioned that this was planned almost 8 months ago. So why did Shinde especially assume that mantle and take it forward? Because it's such a big risk going against all these giants.
Yeah, the funny part about the Eknath Shinde phenomenon is that, as Sanjay Raut, to be fair, rightly said in some capacity, if there was a BJP plus Shiv Sena 2.5 year arrangement, ironically, Eknath Shinde, I know in the beginning, was the leader of the Shiv Sena parliamentary, or rather the Shiv Sena legislative assembly, the whole the number of MLAs that come. So ironically, if that arrangement was followed, you could have had a Fadnavis 2.5 and a Eknath Shinde 2.5, like in the beginning. But of course, we don't know whether that would have happened, because clearly Uddhav Thackeray wanted to prop up Aditya Thackeray. And what I'm hearing right now is also that Uddhav Thackeray is reaching out to the BJP, and he's okay with Fadnavis, becoming CM again, but he wants Aditya to become the deputy CM. That's the arrangement that he's offering right now. So clearly, the whole there was a lot of insecurity among Eknath Shinde and of course Eknath Shinde supporters, and even among the other MLAs who joined him, especially from the pocket of Thane, the region of Thane, where which is the area where Eknath Shinde kind of belongs to, and where he's got a lot of muscle power, organizational power, and of course, a lot of support there among the common people. So there was this perception Aditya was being propped up, and of course his cousin, who I mentioned earlier, Varun Sardesai, who's a relative of Rashmi Thackeray, Uddhav Thackeray's wife. These people were being propped up. People like Anil Parab as well, who's an MLC, and grassroots leaders, people with actual support on the ground, they weren't given as much importance. And there was this famous this incident which Eknath Shinde repeatedly brought about, that when Aditya Thackeray went to Ayodhya around a month and a half before, he wanted a lot of the MLAs wanted to come with him, but a lot of the MLAs, when they reached the airport, before that, they were asked to actually stop, take their bags, and go back home. He didn't want all the MLAs to come to Ayodhya. It was just Aditya Thackeray, a couple of other close aides of Uddhav Thackeray, and of course Eknath Shinde also came along as well. So there was clearly a feeling for Eknath Shinde that if this arrangement goes on, as I mentioned earlier, the MVA, if they contested as an MVA in 2024 or whenever the elections would happen, Shiv Sena would get much fewer seats. That means much fewer prospective MLAs of the Shiv Sena could come. Secondly, the NCP would eat into a lot of constituencies. And, it wasn't really a very good feeling for many of the MLAs. And Eknath Shinde sort of, through his, as publicly mentioned in the assembly, through his closed door meeting with Devendra Fadnavis and with, other leaders of the Sena, I'm sure, he kind of, he got the sense that people were feeling very frustrated, not just the workers, but even the MLAs. He got many of them together. If you remember the first bus which went to, Gujarat, to Surat, and then from there to Guwahati, it had around 12, 11 to 12, MLAs with Eknath Shinde. So it was clearly a well planned thing, and there was insecurity. Ultimately, Sharan, a politician, especially a grassroots politician, wants power. They want respect. They want to, to grow politically, just like in, if you look at engineering, medicine, any other career. So for Eknath Shinde, the politician, he felt that the longer he, stayed in this current arrangement, he was not going to be given much respect, and it was only going to be a
Right.
family affair of the Thackeray's, the NCP, and of course the Congress. So, and also he was, let's be very fair, he was also given backing by the central BJP leadership, by
Right.
Fadnavis, of course, by the state Maharashtra unit of the BJP, and he was. I think it's just one of those things, right? When everything comes to
Yeah.
place, it just falls into place, and there was
We
support
will
being
touch
given
on that
by the BJP
entire.
as well.
Yeah, we'll come to the entire backroom politics part, where all of this came about and was planned meticulously. But before that, would you agree that the trigger point was perhaps the Rajya Sabha elections or the MLC elections for that matter?
Yeah. So what happened in the MLC election was that earlier in 2020, when COVID first started, incidentally, BJP, Sena, your NCP and Congress, they all had an agreement. This was incidentally the election when Uddhav Thackeray was appointed as an MLC, or was elected as an MLC, because he was an MLA, to start things off. So in that 2020 election, all the parties had a pre-arrangement. BJP would have so many, I think, three or four MLCs. Sena had, again, incidentally, two or three. NCP had two, and Congress had two. So it was a pretty, settled election. This time about, BJP were short of four seats, four MLC seats. They weren't short of the fifth. And if and there were overtures by Congress, by the Sena as well, that let's have a fixed election like earlier, in the sense where every party would have a X amount of seats, and everyone would go back home happy. But BJP and Fadnavis wanted to field the fifth candidate, and there was absolutely no certainty that that fifth candidate would win or not. But incidentally, BJP had the support of, as I mentioned, around 115 to 120 at the time in terms of MLAs. But it so happened that cross voting happened, incidentally, from both the Sena and the Congress. Although NCP, nobody really cross voted, because the NCP candidate got more than the number of votes allotted to them. So Congress and the Sena, members cross voted for the BJP candidate, and the MVA lost the fifth seat. You had the usual suspects like Praveen Darekar and a few others who were sure to win, but the fifth candidate of the BJP won, and which kind of set the cat amongst the pigeons. Although the Sanjay Raut and company tried to hush it down, saying that it was just a one-off election, not a direct election. This was a indirect election from the MLAs voting, but that happened. But the trigger, Sharan, was the Rajya Sabha elections, because Rajya Sabha, of course, is a much bigger deal than MLC, because you're electing a parliament member. BJP had clarity that around, I believe, two of their Rajya Sabha members were sure to get elected. But in this case, the third, that's Dhananjay Mahadik, who is an OBC and a prominent leader in the interiors. Dhananjay Mahadik was given the support, and by again, there was some cross voting that happened in terms of by the Congress and the Sena MLAs. This time, the Congress kind of had a couple more MLAs who voted for him, and of course, the NCP got their members nominated pretty easily. But in this case, Dhananjay Mahadik's vote to the Rajya Sabha, that was a big catalyst, because compared to the MLC, this was a bigger surprise. Not too many people expected certain members of the MVA to kind of cross vote for this as well, and that kind of set the cat among the pigeons. And just around 24 to 48 hours after that, you heard the signs of the rebellion brewing, and the rest is history. So
So, do tell us a little bit about the backroom politics that went on that later unfolded as events with Shinde that took place later on when he gathered all the MLAs together. Uh, And then I have another question for you, but do explain the backroom politics of all of
Yeah, so I mean, I think in the beginning, I kind of alluded to the fact that incidentally, Sharon, I think your screen was freezing for a bit. You might just want to just check that out. But in the beginning, like the 8 month planning that I mentioned about, where the BJP, the leadership, both in Delhi and in the state, they definitely had closed door meetings. Especially Fadnavis had a lot of closed door meetings with Eknath Shinde, which the press wasn't really aware about. But after the Rajya Sabha election that I mentioned, for Eknath Shinde had a dinner at his house where a number of Sena MLAs kind of came home, and after that they went by a bus, and a lot of the MLAs weren't aware that they were going to Surat, and they took a bus and they crossed the border. By the way, incidentally, the Home Minister, after Anil Deshmukh went to jail, was Dwalse Patil, and he was an NCP member. So the NCP also had no real idea about this defection happening, open defection happening, so to speak. They took a bus, and of course, they crossed the Maharashtra border and went to Gujarat, went to Surat, and from there they felt that maybe Surat was a bit too close to Maharashtra, and they wanted to kind of go to a bit of a further off region for different reasons, and they took a flight to Guwahati. And incidentally, after that, you had more and more visuals of members like Gulab Rao Patil, who's a very influential leader and really a Bahubali, so to speak. He was there. You had not just MLAs, in from Shiv Sena, but even someone like Yamini uh, Jadhav, whose husband, of course, she's an MLA, but her husband is the standing committee member of the BMC. Very close to the BMC mayor, where they, of course, control all the funds and control a lot of the money that is being allotted to the corporators. BMC, of course, Shiv Sena have been ruling for the last 25 odd years. So in that sense, this entire network of the Sena was completely eroded by of the Uddhav Sena, and not just the MLAs, but even senior corporators in the BMC switched. A lot of people very close to Uddhav Thackeray, like there were reports that even Milan Narvekar could switch in the days to come, who is the personal secretary of Uddhav Thackeray. And a lot of them, switched. And so these weren't just any random MLAs, but these were MLAs very close, geographically to Eknath Shinde in Thane, in Navi Mumbai, in the MMR region. They were also MLAs from Mumbai, which was very surprising to someone like me because Shiv Sena, the Thackeray brand is strongest in Mumbai, where they play up the Marathi card, the regional card, the linguistic card, the Marathi card as well. So in that sense, even someone like my area's MLA, Sada Sarvankar, who's seen as very close to Uddhav Thackeray. His son, Samarthan Sarvankar, is seen very close to Aditya Thackeray, in the Yuva Sena. So people like them leaving in the heart and soul of Mumbai, that was a big surprise. But coming back to the back room, yes, the central leadership did give the go ahead to Devendra Fadnavis to carry out this so-called Operation Lotus. Fadnavis was very clear from the beginning. If you look at his interview, Sharon, that this was not a legitimate government in many ways because the vote from the people of Maharashtra went to a BJP Sena alliance. It didn't go to the Sena, NCP Congress alliance, right? So this was not a very legitimate alliance in that sense, legitimate government in that sense. This was a government where the Sena stole the mandate along with the other two parties, and the green light was given from Delhi to Fadnavis to carry out this operation notice. And a lot of the Sena MLAs that were, as I mentioned earlier, frustrated, that were really unhappy with the way things were unfolding, with the NCP getting a lion's share of the resources of the funds, and of course the Sena MLAs not getting a meeting. Not forget, with the Finance Minister Ajit Pawar, but also with their own party supremo, especially after Uddhav Thackeray had a few health issues. That didn't go well. So Fadnavis, channelized this anger, this frustration, this resentment among all these MLAs really well. And then, of course, the enforcement director also had a lot of cases against people like Yamini Jadhav that I mentioned, and with even Eknath Shinde had got a notice rather, some time back. Then, of course, your Purvesh Naik, had his father had a couple of notices, ED notices as well. So, then you had Prakash Sarnaik, who again was his whole empire, his big business empire was completely, rattled off. Then in interior parts, someone like a Gulab Rao Patil had also had a few cases against his name. Then in Mumbai as well, a lot of the the MLAs were feeling the heat of it, and when they saw what was happening in the NCP with Anil Deshmukh, both by the CBI and of course the ED going after him, and Anil Deshmukh, of course, is in jail right now, including till this day for corruption charges. You had Nawab Malik going for very serious charges of extortion and having close links with Dawood Ibrahim. And you had a lot of the NCP. Ajit Pawar as well, of course, is part of the NCP, the ED racket, the ED radar, so to speak. So they saw the fact that NCP was clearly in trouble, and the ED was going after them, and these MLAs for protection as well, and to ensure that all the corruption that they've done didn't further send them behind bars, and further kind of didn't
Right.
they weren't persecuted, so to
But
speak.
what role do
They
you
also
think
tried
Sharad
to.
Pawar played in all of this? Especially because, working with Fadnavis and making him a chief minister or a deputy chief minister once again would put all of the equations, in a particular spot. So, in that sense, especially because Pawar has that reputation of becoming the kingmaker every time. Tell us a little bit about that.
You're talking about Sharad Pawar or Ajit Pawar?
Sharad Pawar.
Yeah, Sharad Pawar, and that's I'm glad you asked me this because Sharad Pawar has this impression that he is the big daddy, so to speak, the the king, the of backroom politics, the undisputed king of backroom politics. And even though he has not been a mass leader, so to speak, nothing can happen in Maharashtra without Sharad Pawar's backing or his his green signal. And in this sense, Pawar was outfoxed. He really was outfoxed in terms of backroom politics by Devendra Fadnavis. And as much as NCP supporters or admirers of Pawar Saab will be angry, when hearing this, this is a fact. Pawar was outsmarted, outfoxed, and outmaneuvered by Devendra Fadnavis. And to be fair, Pawar did mention to Uddhav Thackeray and to the Sena leadership that there is a lot of rebellion brewing, and people are not very satisfied, not very happy with the way things are happening in Maharashtra right now in terms of Shiv Sena's own leaders. But that probably wasn't taken as seriously, or they didn't feel that someone like an Eknath Shinde could actually rally around 40 MLAs, more than two-thirds the numbers, with and I think he admitted, to be fair, in some capacity, not directly, that yes, I mean he didn't expect such a big rebellion happening with more than two-third party rebelling, and effectively the new group, the Shinde group, getting control of the party of the Shiv Sena, and that was a big jolt for him. Now, as you know, Sharan, the Marathi media is, over the years been cultivated by, in many ways, by Mr. Pawar. So the Marathi media is still going soft on him and calling him, a Chanakya, so to speak. But even they'll have to admit, if not today, going forward, that the old fox has been outsmarted this time. He got the better of the BJP in 2019 when Ajit Pawar became the deputy CM for a few hours or for a couple of days, 18 odd hours or 30 odd hours with Fadnavis as the chief minister, and he got the MLAs back. But this time, Sharad Pawar has been outfoxed, outmaneuvered by Devendra Fadnavis, and this whole move that is being done right under the NCP's nose, because the NCP has the home ministry.
Right.
Incidentally, the MOS, which is the junior home minister, belongs to Shiv Sena, and that Sena MLA is also with Mr. Shinde right now. So lot of moves and maneuvers were played, and the Fadnavis Shinde combination executed it beautifully, because this is not easy to do. 40 MLAs from
Yeah.
Maharashtra going to Guwahati, coming back, voting in the assembly, it's not easy to do.
We are again forgetting one more important character amongst all of this, who is Sanjay Raut. What was his role in all of this? Because it's very confusing to understand the man, his comments, his politics, and what exactly happened. What was his thinking when all of this was happening, and what will his future be going forward? Is nobody's certain of that.
Yeah, Sanjay Raut is a very interesting character. I mean, to give a very brief background, he's a journalist. He was working in some different publications, and different media outlets here in Mumbai and in Maharashtra. And around during the last few years of Balasaheb Thackeray, he got close to the the Sena leadership, and Balasaheb wanted him as the editor of the Samna. And to be fair, the Samna definitely did get more prominence in the in the national media after Sanjay Raut became the editor, because he would give a lot of statements and give a lot of columns in the Samna, which was very sharp and which attacked the government of the day at that time, the Congress initially, and then of course the BJP as well. And in some respects, he would even sharply criticize his own allies, both the BJP during 2014 to 2019, and even to be fair, even the Congress when the MVA was running. So the he did take a lot of liberties, Sanjay Raut, to kind of express his line, which wasn't necessarily always a party line or the line of the Thackeray family or even of Balasaheb Thackeray, but he would also give a few masala, as we say colloquially, and a few a few twists and turns, and add his own masala to the entire thing. But now, over the last 5 6 years, we've got a sense here in Maharashtra and Mumbai that he is more of a Sharad Pawar man, as opposed to along with being a Shiv Sena official MP, Rajya Sabha MP. And he was recently elected in the Rajya Sabha elections as one of the, I think, the first choice Sena MPs as well. But when the MVA fell, the first tweet that he gave was as a tribute or a thank you message to Sharad Pawar Saab for helping the MVA getting formed, and for ensuring its smooth running till whenever it happened. So Sanjay Raut, even now, he does criticize the Sena leadership or the Sena MLAs as well. Uddhav Thackeray, to be fair, hasn't given criticized the BJP or even the Shinde faction beyond a degree. He did say a few things, but now of late, over the last 3 or 4 days or last week, he has been giving a more reconciliatory tone. But Sanjay Raut has called them all kinds of things. Even including Aditya Thackeray as well, has called them panwalas, auto rickshaw drivers, and he's been very curt and very, very disrespectful to them. So, in terms of even the messages that are coming from, initially from Guwahati and from the Shinde supporters, is that, Sanjay Raut dot hai, and it wasn't very parliamentary, and a lot of the worker supporters, even MLA, said that Sanjay Raut is singularly responsible for this government to fall, for the Sena to break up, and of course for the MVA to fall because of his statements, because of his loud mouth, before of his his foot in the mouth disease. So Sanjay Rao definitely would is was a troublesome factor, and let's not forget now that if Shinde gets control of the Sena, it is, and what we've seen in the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha recently, in terms of majority of the Lok Sabha MP supporting Shinde. If that happens, and if he's officially recognized by the courts, because the matter is right now sub judice, then I wouldn't put it past someone like Shinde to call these two Rajya Sabha MPs back, Priyanka Chaturvedi and Sanjay Raut, who are seen as
Right.
very close to the
Right.
Thackeray family,
Yeah.
and appoint maybe one of their own. So
Yeah.
Sanjay Raut's future is quite uncertain right now, but he
Right.
might very well have a home in the NCP if the Sena
Yeah.
flirtation doesn't last
Hmm.
beyond a point.
When the entire episode finally ended and Mr. Shinde was appointed as the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, many people, more than being surprised about the fact that Mr. Shinde was appointed as the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, were equally and more surprised with Mr. Fadnavis becoming the Deputy Chief Minister. What is the impact of such political positioning? Because perhaps for the first time in history, you have a Chief Minister becoming a Deputy Chief Minister. How does that play out?
Yeah, that, I mean, honestly, I got the shock of my life when that happened. When that press conference happened with Fadnavis addressing the media and him publicly saying that I will. We have decided that Eknath Shinde will be the chief minister. They were literally shocked. I think among all the media personnel there, and even among the opposition, Ajit Pawar himself said that in the assembly that he was shocked that Eknath Shinde was a CM and not Fadnavis. Everyone was surprised. Even Pawar Saab was surprised as well. So that came across as a bit of a shock, but internally what I have come to understand is that before this entire move took place, right before the MLAs went to Guwahati, especially initially when Shinde went to Guwahati, it was decided amongst, in a closed room meeting, or between the BJP High Command, the state leadership in terms of Fadnavis, and of course with Shinde, that Shinde would be the CM. So for them, it wasn't a surprise. The first part wasn't a surprise that Shinde would be the CM. And Sharan, to just elaborate on this a bit, it does make a bit of sense because now that Shinde is a CM, it is easier for him to hold on to these 40 odd MLAs because they are supporting a man who's not the deputy CM but who's a CM. So the CM, of course, brings it with itself its own prestige, its own resources, its own police support, and of course, I mean, respect more than anything else. And alongside that, he's also Maratha, which is the numerically the most the strongest caste in terms of numbers in the state. Sharad Pawar, of course, he's also Maratha himself, and there is a bit of an anti-Brahmin sentiment which is stoked up by the likes of Sharad Pawar and by the likes of other Maratha leaders, as Raj Thackeray recently pointed out in one of his speeches. And it would have been easier for to stoke up kind of a you know a revolt or a few riots here and there in Maharashtra by certain leaders if Fadnavis was the chief minister. So in that sense, replacing MVA government, which under which really was a brainchild of Sharad Pawar, a Maratha, by another Maratha, and especially a Maratha belonging to the Kunbi Maratha caste, which is again numerically the most subsect within the Maratha caste, and somebody who comes from a poor family, an auto rickshaw driver who risen up the ranks to become the chief minister, that has its own impact. The bigger reason I would say is because the fact that a Shiv Sainik, right, a Shiv Sainik, grounded grassroots Shiv Sainik is a chief minister, that will play a big part to kind of rally the troops to get the numbers together. Because as when the cadre sees a Thackeray being replaced by another Shiv Sainik, then the whole the control or the holdover the
Right,
cadres, the workers by the Shinde faction can be consolidated, as opposed to
right.
when Thackeray gets removed by a Fadnavis, by a BJP chief minister with Shinde as deputy chief minister. Thackeray could have, kind of played the emotional card a bit more, the
Yes.
Marathi card, the Marathi Asmita card, and could have got the cadres back. So right now it's much tougher for, the Thackeray family to get control of the Shiv Sena, as opposed to if a Fadnavis would have been CM. The second part, very quickly,
Hmm.
Sharan, why was Fadnavis a deputy chief minister? Yes, that was a surprise again to not just to all of us, but to Fadnavis himself, I think, because he did announce that in that press conference that he would not be part of the government. After that, he admitted, and JP Nadda, came on television. He gave a bite to the NI, Asian News International, saying that we would like Fadnavis to be the deputy chief minister. Amit Shah also tweeted the same, and eventually Fadnavis agreed to that. After Narendra Modi, the prime minister, called him twice and requested that he take the job because he wants to continue the good work that he had done in those 5 years as chief minister. So I think while initially Fadnavis could have been a bit upset, about the fact that he's been literally made deputy CM, which is a demotion after him becoming CM. I think he has kind of agreed to the political scenario in the state and to ensure that the Shinde government goes as much as possible, at least till the BMC elections are won, and maybe going ahead to 2024 as well.
What are the other rumors that we should know? Since you've been telling us such insightful analysis of the whole episode, is there anything else that the public maybe hasn't seen through the entire episode, Suraj?
So, I mean, what the main thing and which is the biggest, positive for the Shinde group is that more and more MLAs, more and more corporator. Like recently, we saw one spokesman, one very, very fiery spokesman called Sheetal Matre, who is very commonly, heard in the Marathi media, who was a member of the Uddhav Sena, who has recently jumped ship to the Shinde Sena. So it's not just the MLAs, the 40 odd MLAs or the 12 out of 18. I think it's more than 12, honestly. I think more than, there are some MPs out there. Many of them will eventually join the Shinde camp. So majority of these, MPs, MLAs, even corporators, outside the BMC, in places like Aurangabad, in places like Jalgaon, places like Navi Mumbai, Thane, the outskirts of the Mumbai, metropolitan region. Many of them have joined, most of them have joined the Shinde camp. And once the BMC elections are announced, I'm sure, Sharan, you will see reports that more and more of the Shiv Sena corporators will switch camps because the power is right now with the Shinde camp. Uddhav Thackeray, as we've seen, is not really a grassroots politician. He's more of
Yeah,
a supremo sitting in Matoshri. For him now, after his health issues, to travel the length and breadth of Mumbai and Maharashtra is not going to be easy.
yeah,
So things are not looking good for the Uddhav camp. What we're seeing on the ground over the last 1 or 2 weeks is the Shinde camp is consolidating. The MLAs who defected are very comfortable. There were rumors that they would be, Sharad Pawar recently said that they'll have to come back to Mumbai. The inference was they might be attacked by the Sena cadres. Nothing of that sort has happened. The
yeah,
Sena cadres, the ones who are with the corporators or with the MLAs, like in my area, Sada Sarvankar is the MLA. There's no attacks have happened, no commotion has happened. He's been welcomed, in fact, by the Sena supporters and Sena workers. So things are looking good. The one rumor I can tell you is that there is a rebellion brewing in another party, not the Sena and not the Congress as well. Who we've had accounts of a number of Congress MLAs not being present in the assembly to vote against Shinde, and some of them did vote for the BJP in the Rajya Sabha elections and, of course, in the MLC elections as well. But there is a rebellion brewing, I can tell you, in the NCP. It is not out completely. It is a rebellion which definitely has the blessings of Ajit Pawar, who wants to, eventually take control of the party after Sharad Pawar's time is over. But whether that will come out in the open anytime soon remains a question mark, because right now the NDA, or the new NDA, the Shinde BJP NDA, has control, and it doesn't look as though it's going to be out of power till 2024 when the next elections take place. So whether Ajit Pawar will openly rebel right now remains to be seen. But I can tell you, last night there was a tweet put out by Praful Patel that all the national, you know, departments of the NCP are dissolved as of now. He later issued a clarification saying that we are not talking about Mumbai or Maharashtra. We're just talking about Delhi. So that's also there, but there
yeah.
are things happening in the NCP. So we're gonna. I think our viewers have to keep our ears and eyes open about that. But nothing may happen immediately. We'll have to wait and
Yeah.
watch.
What's up with Raj Thackeray? How does he fit into the entire equation? I completely forgot to ask you.
Raj Thackeray is the million-dollar question. It's the
And
million.
and I'm asking you this because, especially because of what you said in the last 5 minutes, it seems that the future for Uddhav Thackeray and his entire company seems very bleak, at least in the near future, right? Because Shinde has now completely consolidated his own party and his own support base. And now that Fadnavis is also happy becoming the deputy chief minister, the entire eyes are now turning towards Raj Thackeray because obviously he senses an opportunity here.
He does, Sharan, but then it's also been a bit of a negation for him because if you notice, in those Dasara rallies that he did last year, and after that as well, he did get like a bit of a cult following again. When he took up the Hanuman Chalisa issue and the loudspeaker issue as well. That why should loudspeakers be played? Why should the azan be played, loudly in public? So there was a momentum growing there. But now that and effectively, let's face it, this is for the Marathi Hindu vote, right? The Marathi Asmita vote. And there's always a vote in Mumbai and in MMR, that is the Mumbai metropolitan region, and in some other parts of Maharashtra, where people will neither be pro BJP, neither pro Congress or NCP, but they want a regional chauvinistic party with Marathi first identity, a linguistic identity, and of course a pro Marathi agenda. So in that sense, that vote will always go to either the Sena, or someone like a Raj Thackeray, or maybe a new force in the future. So in that sense, that vote could have been got by Raj Thackeray in the BMC election and the future as well. As a result of the Shinde capture of the Sena, that kind of his leverage or his bargaining power again goes down. There are reports that I think he will eventually ally with the BJP and the Shinde Sena for the BMC election in some capacity, or there will be a informal alliance where BJP doesn't put up a candidate against Raj Thakray's party in some seats. Same might happen for the MLA election as well, in some seats, not in all. So that could happen. But the rumors that we are hearing right now is that BJP and Shinde have offered Raj Thakray's son Amit Thackeray a ministerial berth in this new government. he could be a junior minister in this current Maharashtra government. So
Right.
if that
Maybe
happens, then of course Raj Thakray's hands will also be tied to an extent that he
yeah,
can't do the same thing that Uddhav Thackeray was earlier doing or Sanjay Raut was earlier doing, where effectively you're part of the government of the BJP, but you're also criticizing the government from outside. So that is
yeah,
something that BJP is very clear they don't want again. Either you
yeah,
support or you be in the opposition, but don't do this double game of being in the government with supporting the NDA and all at the same time criticizing the NDA as well. So that can't
yeah,
happen.
yeah. This has been a fantastic session, Suraj, because I've been wanting to invite you and just to put the whole episode into perspective, just to discuss the elements that were, are parts of the puzzle but were not really connected. And I think you've presented a great story. You've presented it very chronologically, and you've also given us some exclusive insights from your sources within certain political parties. But as you know, today the presidential polls are also going on. So, have you been following it? What do you think will be the outcome? Because by the time the video goes out, I think India would clearly know who will be the president. But let me ask you what your thoughts are before we conclude.
Yeah, I think the counting is still happening. So, as we speak right now, the counting is happening. But by the time the video goes out, I'm pretty sure Draupadi Murmu would be announced as the next president of India. And what will be interesting is not so much that she'll be president because that's a foregone conclusion, but the amount of cross voting that's happened, from not just the Congress but other opposition parties like the TMC. We heard that 12 TMC MPs have voted for Draupadi Murmu. So that will be a real slap on the face to the opposition leaders who kind of, didn't want her as the unanimous, uncontested choice. And it'll also be a big slap on the face for Yashwant Sinha as well. But about the social aspect, I think BJP have once again shown that they are the party for the social justice movement, not the DMK who talks about Periyar, not the Congress, not Mayawati or Mamta or anyone else, because BJP have repeatedly given a chance really to different people. You had likes of Bangaru Lakshman, a Dalit, being the party president, which until now there was no Dalit in the CPM Politburo, or in the top echelons of the Congress party for a long time. You had Ramnath Kovind, a Dalit who was the president of India, again appointed, nominated by the BJP, and now of course you have a tribal woman who has had to endure tremendous personal losses and a lot of economic hardships as well to become the president of India. So in that respect, full credit to the prime minister and to the BJP top leadership for ensuring that there is genuine social justice in this country and for electing a woman like Draupadi Murmu who can hopefully go on to do great things, not just for her tribal community but of course for empowerment and for empowering the weaker sections in this country.
Absolutely, this is indeed a historic moment in the history of this country, and I think this will set a precedent. And the BJP has tried to do this several times in the past as well, whether it's with President APJ Abdul Kalam being nominated, to the president's post earlier. It definitely sets a certain precedent, and that's what is very interesting about the whole episode.
But think
Thank you
about it,
so much
Sharan.
for
I mean,
joining.
the Congress had appointed, earlier nominated Shankar Dayal Sharma,
Yeah,
as the president in '90s. Now they've appointed Yashwant Sinha, who's, by all means not exactly a weaker section or an Antodaya or
yeah,
in any way. So something for us to ponder over. The parties that talk about representing the weaker sections are really not doing so, and it is the
right.
BJP that is really giving them respect and giving them, their due,
Yeah.
and that's something we have to acknowledge.
Right, absolutely. I mean, there was a vacuum, and the BJP is trying to utilize it to the best of its capacity because I think there is a realization that these regional parties or even national parties like the Congress, they have their own limitations because they're bound by their family obligations to the party in a certain manner of speaking. Thank you so much, Suraj, for joining us today. This has been a very enlightening session. Viewers, please do let us know what you think about the entire episode narrated by Suraj. And if you have any questions for him, we would be very happy to take those questions offline and online once again with Suraj in conversation.